Good afternoon. I'm the editor for Education Next, and in the upcoming issue, we have an article on teacher pension funds that I think you'll find totally fascinating. It's by Michael Podgorski and Robert Costrell, and Bob Costrell is here with us today from the University of Arkansas to talk about the research, and I thought we'd share a few highlights with you. So Bob, tell us what is the most important finding in your research on teacher pensions?
Well, in this article, what we focus on is the uneven distribution of pension benefits among short-termers versus long-termers and amongst mobile versus immobile teachers.
And so what do you find about the long-termers compared to the short-termers? Do they walk off with all the dough?
Yes, in short. We find that approximately half the pension wealth is redistributed as compared to a more distributionally neutral type of program from those who separate prior to their 50s to those who separate from teaching in their 50s.
Well, this has always been a bone of contention in our family because my wife taught for 5 years in 2 different states and never saw a lick of a pension. And I suppose that's not atypical, right?
No, it's not atypical. You're focusing on the mobility dimension of this, which follows from that first feature. And yes, it's a tremendous penalty that's imposed on mobile teachers, such as your wife, as compared to those who spend their entire career in one system. We did, for example, some simulations comparing teachers who would have stayed in one state for, say, 30 years as compared to the same teacher splitting her career between 2 states, 15 years each. And we found, again, on average, about half the pension wealth was lost for the mobile teacher.
If you were to do a pension reform, what would you recommend?
What we would recommend that states consider is of the variety known as a cash balance plan. What this does is it is still a defined benefit plan so that none of the risk would be passed on to the teacher with regard to the investments. That would still be done by the pension fund. But the rate of pension wealth accrual would be much more even and constant over one's career. So in that respect, it would look very much like a defined contribution plan, and someone who works for 5 years would still be able to walk away with pension wealth equivalent to, say, 10% of their earnings over that time, or whatever percent the state would decide to put in or to match with regard to employee contributions.
So every teacher would get the same share of the pension depending on how long they had worked and how much they had contributed to the educational system.
Correct. It would look very similar, again, to a defined contribution plan, which is typically in the form the employee puts in 5% or 10%, and the employer matches, let's say, 5 or 10%. The difference would be that instead of leaving it to the teacher to invest those funds, the state would do the investing for the teachers and would guarantee the teacher a guaranteed return.
So how come we have a pension system that gives so much money to those teachers who teach for very long periods of time and so little money to those teachers who just leave after 4 or 5 years to go raise a family or go into some other occupation? How did this all come about?
Well, this goes back probably close to a century in many areas. It probably has something to do with the dynamics of the political process. These are all politically determined pension formulas. There's a few dimensions to that. One is a state acting on its own would probably not necessarily want to give much of a pension to someone who's going to leave and go someplace else. States may have an incentive to want to reduce mobility, each state taking on its own. even though taken as a whole, that's probably not a good thing. By the same token, the teachers' unions are certainly very active in the pension legislation process, and it's not uncommon for teacher unions to pay more attention to the interests of their senior members than to their junior members.
So it seems like every day I pick up the paper, I read about another pension crisis out there. Is this going to be a time when we're really going to take hold of this issue and we're going to rethink through how pensions should be designed and the way they should operate?
I think the fiscal crisis does provide an opportunity which many states are now looking at, perhaps for fiscal reasons that they're going to be re-examining their pension systems, but I think it's also an opportunity to look at this whole other dimension having to do with teacher quality, really, and issues of mobility and the like. We've got a whole new generation of teachers, many of whom may simply want to work for 5 or 10 years. A lot of idealistic young types, like Teach for America types, who may not want to spend their entire career in one place. It's an opportunity to re-examine the teacher pension system and make it a little bit more rational and a little bit more fair to younger teachers and teachers who are more mobile. There's a lot of interest in this. For example, Kate Walsh's folks over at the National Council for Teacher Quality have been paying a lot of attention to this. Tom Carroll's folks at the National Commission for Teaching in America's Futures taking a lot of look at this as well. So we just had a conference down in Dallas last month with policymakers from around the country, legislators, and so on. So it's a timely issue.
Well, you're doing very important work, Bob, you and Mike Podgorski. So this is Bob Costrell. Thank you, Bob, for your insights on teacher pensions, and good luck with your work as you go forward.
Thanks, Paul.